Believe it or not, Black Friday arrives in just a few weeks, and retailers are hoping not only for a big day, but a big Christmas season. According to the latest MasterCard SpendingPulse survey, their wishes might be granted. In October, retail spending was up more than 3%, with big gains in the apparel and the restaurant sectors. Joining us to break down the results is Kamalesh Rao. He's Director of Economic Research for MasterCard SpendingPulse. And Kamalesh, you look at hundreds of millions of transactions over all of the MasterCard networks here. Tell me about this momentum you're seeing.
Well, I think it's we need to kind of put a few things in context, just because we had a really weak summer. So we're talking about retail sales averaging about 1% growth. It's extraordinarily weak numbers by most measures. But lately, in September and in October, we saw a little bit of a pickup. And now, in October, as you mentioned, we had about 3.3% growth for total retail sales. That's exaggerated a little bit by gasoline, but once you strip out gasoline, we're talking about 2.7% growth, which is actually pretty decent, especially compared to, say, what we saw during the summer.
Right. So with the context of course, we've got 9.6% unemployment. You've got all these pressures out there. But given that, what you are seeing, you find promising.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have some good momentum being built up, especially when we look at month-to-month numbers, because the year-to-year numbers are a little bit more complicated. But especially when we look at the month-to-month numbers, we are seeing some pretty decent momentum going into the holiday season. The momentum may not necessarily translate, but I think it's a good sign.
Where are you seeing the buying in terms of where in this country and in what sectors?
Well, I think overall, I think in terms of geography, I think with the exception of maybe on the West Coast, just because the California economy tends to be just a little bit weaker, I think in general we've seen sort of a nationwide gathering of momentum in terms of retail spending. In terms of sectors, what we're seeing, I think, is particularly in the discretionary sectors. We're talking about apparel, we're talking about restaurants. Until October, we were actually seeing some pretty good numbers from electronics as well.
Why did that fall off?
It's a good question. Actually, electronics was actually building quite a lot of momentum coming out of the summer. There may be a little bit of a difference in terms of product launches. Certainly, electronics around this time of year are driven by key kind of blockbuster segments, so big video games dropping, for example. I think a lot of the video games dropped a little later in October and now in November. Call of Duty just came out, those kind of things.
So you might see that skewed towards the next few months.
Yeah, so skewed towards November.
What do you see in terms of the price points and the amount that people are spending?
Right. So I think one of the key kind of pictures we're getting from our latest data is that people are willing to spend on discretionary items as long as there's a relatively flexible or low price point. So as long as a sector can offer relatively modestly priced goods, I think they are set to actually capture a lot of this kind of surge in discretionary.
Is there a sweet spot in there? I mean, what is a low price?
Low price, I would guess, was somewhere between, say, $40 to $100. Not necessarily, or 40 to probably closer to 80. Not high-end goods, but I think sort of modestly priced goods, I think, are really poised to capture a lot of this kind of resurgence in discretionary spending.
Now,